All right, welcome everyone to today's episode titled The Self-Sabotage, where we'll talk about the different ways we self-sabotage ourselves and how to identify that self-worth element. Our guest for today is a mental fitness and executive coach for entrepreneurs. He is currently building an online community for dadpreneurs and works with them on creating a better balance between family and running a business and managing all the challenges that come with both. He is a certified coach with the International Coaching Federation and a certified mental fitness coach with the organization Positive Intelligence. Over the last 5 years, he's coached hundreds of businesses across North America and currently owns a small business in Victoria, BC, that is operated by a general manager without Fyfe's day-to-day. It is my pleasure to introduce a good friend of mine, Fyfe.
Thanks so much for having me, man. Excited to be here.
It's great to have you. It's great to have you. When I think about people that I want to bring onto this podcast to provide tools to individuals in sales, I think you bring a very unique perspective. So I'm really excited to dive into our conversation today. But before we do, I think it's good to give some context into how we met. It was hilarious. Actually, I was just walking down the street one day and I saw a car that was branded with Uplife mental fitness, and I was like, oh, what is that? And I just Googled it, and it turned out Fyfe was the owner of this company. So the branding of the vehicle caught my attention. Reached out to Fyfe on LinkedIn. We've had a few conversations since. He's even coached me a little bit as well. So it was a very unique way that we met. But instantly when we started having these conversations, the connection and understanding was understood. And I think, not all the time do you find coaches and individuals that you can relate to on a deeper level. So grateful for you, man. And thanks for being here.
Yeah. That was super fun for me. I think that was the first time somebody actually messaged me because they saw the car. So I was pumped. I was so excited. And yeah, there's just been a lot of synchronicities with what you're up to and a lot of crossover. So I'm excited to dive into that today.
For sure. And I know a lot of the work you're doing right now is focusing on, dads specifically, but there's so many elements around self-worth and how we sabotage ourselves that I think can be very applicable to the sales community as well. In sales right now, self-worth, confidence, these are massive components in everyday selling. So, making sure that we're showing up as the best version of ourselves really is the goal of this podcast, and equipping these sales reps with these tools. So self-sabotage to me is one of the major roadblocks. And I'd love for you to maybe talk briefly about the different ways that we self-sabotage ourselves. I know you've got an awesome setup that breaks this down. So I might hand it over to you and let you do your thing on that.
Yeah. Happy to dive in. And yeah, before we even dive into how we self-sabotage. Yeah, I'm working with dadpreneurs, entrepreneurial dads, whatever you want to call them. But they're in the sales space. I believe everybody in some capacity sells and is influencing people. So I think it's a really important skill. But especially if you're in the sales field, it's stressful. It's a very high pressure thing and can create a lot of doubt and forms of self-sabotage. So the stuff I see with the guys that I work with, I've been in sales type roles before. I've worked a lot with sales guys too. So can definitely relate. And so, I mean, high level mental fitness is essentially your capacity to handle challenges with a positive mindset. So in a sales context, there's a lot of situations where you're working with a client or a customer, and maybe they're not an ideal person, or the deal doesn't go through. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of situations where something can be seen as a challenge and this is bad. And it can drop us into scarcity, a bit more survival mode. So mental fitness is essentially proactively cultivating your ability to handle those glitches, those mistakes, those challenges, those difficult people with more positive emotions.
And I love how mental fitness is the wording that you use. On the last episode with Colin Powell, we talked about how, we as people love doing the physical fitness, right? And we have no issue going to the gym, 5 days a week and pushing ourselves to the limit. Yet when it comes to mental fitness, we don't quite always have the same openness or willingness to put in the work. And I don't even know if we fully understand that we have to put in the work. You have to practice. You have to do these things like physical fitness to get the results. So I think that pairing of words of mental fitness, it really hits home for me and for a lot of listeners, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah. Well, and we haven't had the tools. It hasn't been something that's been taught or educated on, that this is something you can cultivate, like physical fitness.
Very true.
And so I think that's just kind of, it's starting to become more prevalent, which I'm really excited about, because it's been extremely helpful for me and a lot of my clients to have this new toolkit to manage some of this stuff more proactively and like build that capacity.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like very high level, sounds like you've talked a little bit about like survival brain versus thriving brain. For the context of this conversation, when I refer to saboteurs, there are specific parts of your brain that are associated with how we self-sabotage. So very simplistically, say the left side of your brain is more associated with the saboteur side. That's your brain stem, your limbic system, your fight or flight, your more survival brain. That's associated with motivating yourself with negative emotions. And other side, right side, middle prefrontal cortex, empathy circuitry, more creative right brain, motivates through positive emotions. So you can think about like the left saboteur side as your Darth Vader. Anger, guilt, shame, judgment, cynicism, like all those negative emotions, fear, that's what we use to navigate the challenges that we're up against. Whereas that right side, that's like your Yoda, that's your Jedi side, that's able to navigate the same challenge, but from a place of clear-headed laser focus, empathy, creativity. It's just a very different energy that you're in and emotion that you're in to handle the same challenge. So there's these two sides that we kind of drop in and out of, and the goal is, how do you build up the muscles on that the Yoda side, that Jedi side, so that you're spending more time there, and then you're handling the challenges from that space.
Yeah, and that reminds me a lot on the last episode how, we had talked about the first piece being awareness before, we are able to even build that toolkit, if you will. It's the awareness of where you are, right? So if you have that Darth Vader brain or not, right? And it's like tuning into that. So I think that what you've done here with what we're going to talk about with breaking it down into different ways really helps that awareness. It allows people to identify to a specific element. So I'm excited to jump into the specifics of that, because I think it's really well laid out.
So the research behind all this, they did root factor analysis, which is essentially you take all these different components and distill it down into its like most simple form. So an analogy for that is to paint all the different colors you can see, you just need 3 colors. So you can distill all these thousands of colors down into like the most simple form. You get 3 colors, and that's what you do. You can paint
Love
with.
that.
Same with how we self-sabotage. So they took a bunch of research, went through all these different kind of systems, distilled it all down, and there's just 10 ways that we self-sabotage. And I'll make sure that I share the link with you, but there's a free assessment that people can do that can help identify what those are.
Yeah.
We can talk about some of them. We probably won't have time for all of them though. The ones that probably most relate to the sales field and like what you see people struggle with, we can definitely dive into those and like how that would actually show up.
Yeah. I think the quiz is really great too, because it allowed me to get some insight myself. And when I did it, there was a few that stood out to me personally, that we can talk about in more detail as we go, but it was very insightful to kind of see where I fell. So yeah, I mean, if you want, maybe we can just kind of like talk about them, list them out, and then we can talk about a few as we go.
Yeah. So there's 10 core archetypal ways that we self-sabotage. There's one which is some of these words like saboteur or master saboteur, it kind of sounds silly. So for people that are listening, it's like, this sounds kind of weird. Like, trust me, yeah, it sounds a little weird, and it did for me at first, but it just gives you a new language to label some of these things that are happening, and it just kind of pops you out of the weeds way faster.
Yeah.
So the master one is the judge, and this is how we judge ourselves, we judge others, and we judge circumstances. And this is the voice of like what's wrong or what's bad. And an event will happen. Let's put it in the sales context. What's like the most common thing people get stressed out
You
with
miss
in
quota.
sales?
You miss quota. You know,
Miss your quota.
Yeah, you're behind, say, on the quarter, and you just miss quota.
And your immediate reaction probably is like, this is bad.
Yeah, it's like, oh my God, you know, a lot of reps and organizations are tying their identity to that in terms of their worth within the organization. So it's like, oh my God, I'm gonna get fired, or oh my God, you know, blank, 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 and it just spirals from there. And I think if it happens continually, the judge can really overpower.
Yeah. But that initial like split second reaction is like, you realize you haven't hit quota. It's like, boom, this is bad.
Yeah.
So we immediately drop into judging the situation of like, maybe we're judging the economy. This economy, that's why this is bad. Like, screw the economy. And we just get into like negative emotions around the economy. Maybe it's the mirrors on ourselves. It's like, oh, this is my fault. I screwed up. I screwed up this one call. That's why I didn't hit quota. And we judge ourselves. We feel angry with ourselves, or we just beat ourselves up.
Yeah. Or it's like, oh yeah, the leads aren't good, or oh yeah, you know, there's all these reasons that you kind of make up to
maybe judging the marketing team that's bringing in the leads, or you're judging the clients themselves because they screwed the deal at the last minute.
Yep.
So there's constantly this voice of the inner critic, essentially, but it's judging everything that's happening from a place of this is bad, this is wrong, this isn't good. And most of the time that's so automatic that we don't even see it happening. We just buy into it's like, oh, this is bad. And most of the people around you will buy into that this is bad as well.
Yeah.
So it can be really hard to see. And because it's something that's happened for your entire lifetime that you haven't really noticed, it's so automatic that you don't even see it happening. And that's part of that awareness is like, okay, when you really step back and start to look at like, what am I judging? And you start to look at everything you're doing, just walking down the street, judging the person that walks by because you don't like their perfume, or like they walk too close to you, like whatever that is. When I work with clients, the first couple of weeks, they're like shocked. They're like, man, this is everywhere. I am so judgmental. It feels like you're going backwards.
Yeah.
But that's like the instigator. Something happens, like this is bad. We need to be in negative emotions to figure like that immediately puts us in negative emotions. And then that triggers these other saboteurs, which are kind of like the strategies that we deploy to deal with this is bad. So an example of that is the controller saboteur. So a high level, the controller anxiety-based need to take charge and control situations and people's actions to one's own will. High anxiety and impatience when that's not possible. So that's kind of like the description of the controller. And some of the thoughts that might be coming up is like, when I'm not in control, that's bad. It creates anxiety. When I am in control, I get outcomes.
Yeah.
Unless I control things, nothing is going to get done. So for a lot of leaders, that shows up as micromanagement.
100%.
Maybe in a sales call, this shows up as you being too forceful, not listening as much. You're really just trying to control that potential customer to force them into a sale, because it's stressful and you don't want to lose that sale. So that's your kind of strategy to deal with that uncertainty.
Yeah. And I think as well, sorry. Yeah. I think as well, when we're on a sales call, we might be trying to control things that we can't, like, you know, with the client. We can set up, you know, as much as possible in terms of guiding them, but there are some elements that are out of our control. And I think that's where some reps struggle as well, right? They want to have control of every single element, but there is some elements that are out of your control as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another one, what was another top one for you? And we can kind of talk about that and make
Yeah,
it like more real from your own experience too.
the avoider was a big one for me.
The avoider. Yeah. So like the actual description, focusing on the positive and pleasant in an extreme way, avoiding difficult and unpleasant tasks and conflicts.
Yeah.
So something bad happens or something that's not ideal. And the strategy is, I don't want to deal with this. I'm just going to avoid the thing that's making me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So what was like, how did that show up for you, or how do you see that showing up for yourself?
Yeah, I think for me, it's like, maybe there's an element sometimes that, needs work. Like, okay, I can really improve. I should really be improving this. Maybe it's the discovery or the demo. I think sometimes what happens is some of us avoid these situations that we know are uncomfortable and require a lot of work. And that's where I guess coaching comes in. And when you have like good management, they can kind of coach to these specific elements that you might be avoiding. Because I think every rep has some element maybe that they don't enjoy as much that they're avoiding and could be putting more work into, right? So maybe it's like putting the reps into listening to calls, to practicing specific things so that you can show up, as the best version of yourself on the next call. But even beyond that, also, I think it also applies to bigger picture here with like, overwhelm, burnout, self-sabotage, all these things. Like people are avoiding putting in the work sometimes to prevent that from happening. Like I myself, was at a point where previously in my career, I knew I was not in a good place and I was just avoiding. I didn't want to acknowledge it. And I was scared to put in the work, building that routine, developing a meditation practice, all these things that I now have. I was avoiding that as well. So I think these difficult situations, whether it's on a sales call, but also even zooming out like in the role more specifically, we just try and like sweep that under the rug. It's like, oh yeah, well, I don't know, just kind of keep going here. And I think that's where it gets really, really dangerous.
Yeah. And there's an aspect, like one of the things that stuck with me ever since I heard it was, you don't avoid the thing, you avoid how the thing makes you feel. So it's like, I'm avoiding listening to my sales call. It's not because I don't like listening to sales call. I'm avoiding it because it makes me feel uncomfortable hearing my own voice or like actually admitting that I'm not doing as well as I think I am.
Yep.
The maybe the avoider in the sense of like dealing with the burnout and setting those boundaries and those routines. It's like I'm avoiding actually admitting and the discomfort of admitting that I'm actually not in a good place. Like that there's a discomfort there. It's like, I don't want to admit that. That shows that I'm weak or like I don't
Yeah.
have it together or whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is with the avoider, we know we're not addressing that thing. So it just kind of sits in the back of our mind and like creates some guilt or negative emotions because we know we're not addressing this thing. So it doubles
Yeah.
down and then usually it blows up in your face at some point, whether it's burnout or not addressing conflict,
Yeah.
or not dealing with the tasks or the things that you should be doing. It like festers and festers and festers until it like hits a boiling point and then just kind of like explodes.
Yeah. And I think even, in life as well, obviously throughout COVID times, things got weird. And I think a lot of people were, having maybe a couple beers at home more than they would. This is just a life example. And they were avoiding admitting that, like, okay, I'm having beers every day right now. Like this is not great. And then before they knew it, it became a habit. And I have a few friends who it's like, this now is the way that it is. And they had to make a very conscious effort to break that. And yeah, I think there's so many times in my life, and I'm sure for many listeners as well, where we avoid the thing that we don't like you said, how it makes us feel. So that's powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. What was another one for you?
Yeah, I think hyperachiever is a big one for individuals in sales, right? Like especially again, I keep going back to quota because that is such an essential part and foundational part of being a sales professional. And I think every single rep or sales professional at some point in their career will probably have a bad month. Have you accepted that? And the hyperachiever, I think, struggles with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'll read out the description for the hyperachiever. Um, Dependent on constant performance and achievement for self-respect and self-validation. Highly focused on external success, leading to unsustainable workaholic tendencies and a loss of touch with deeper emotional and relationship needs.
It's
Um,
big.
any like sports, any people that are competitive, and I think the hyperachiever is quite prevalent in North America. There's just
Yes.
like this very competitive nature, capitalism, get the next big thing, like badges of honor, um, and entrepreneurship. I see this everywhere with the guys that I work with. I work with women too, but like it's everywhere. And what sucks too is this is the thing where you hit the milestone, maybe you celebrate for 2 minutes, and you're like, okay, what's the next thing? So you're constantly chasing this next mountaintop that changes constantly. Like you cross the finish line, and there's another finish line down the
Oh man.
down the way, and it's why you see so many successful athletes and billionaires that are miserable
Yeah.
because they keep chasing and thinking that on the other side of this, then they'll have their self-respect and validation and feel a certain way, and that's not where it comes from.
And that is sales. Sales, we are the high performing athletes of the workplace. And, very similar to an athlete, there's a leaderboard, usually at a sales organization, which is like the standings. You see yourself where you are, and every month or every quarter that resets, right? So you might have an amazing month, top of the leaderboard, um, and you get that quick 2 minutes of, okay, yeah, I was the best that month, and then it resets, and it's this constant chasing and desire to be that number one rep, to be that consistent rep. Consistency is praised in sales, obviously for good reason, but it can be toxic when you're constantly, like you said, chasing that next month, next quarter, next month, next quarter, and if you're not aligned with your purpose and with what you're doing, it can become very, very toxic. So I think that's what everything you said hits home for me, and I'm sure a lot of listeners in the sales world, around how it's structured and how it's set up. um, and there's a lot of very wealthy, miserable individuals in sales who are just doing it for the quote unquote money, and I think that's a big thing. Like, oh yeah, salespeople are just doing it for the money, right? And perhaps some are, but I think those that have found more beyond that are the ones that truly are excelling in many different ways.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that's tricky with this is because identity is so tied to success and results. When a month doesn't go well, it's like that's a direct reflection of my worth. Like that's me being shitty. Um, and it's been a huge challenge for me. Like this is something I've struggled with, is how do I start to detach my identity from results in my business? Because up until now, it's like I am my business. As a sales rep, it's like my career, this is who I am, is I'm a salesperson. So how do you start to like detach it in a way that you're still competitive and you're still striving forward, but you're doing that from more of that like Yoda Jedi style, where you're calm, you're focused, like laser focused, you're getting results, but it's not this like Darth Vader, like beating yourself up and like going through these huge roller coasters when results dip, because that's what I see all the time is results are good, I'm good. Results bad, I'm bad. And you're just constantly riding this roller coaster of self-worth, and like it's exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was that person, literally. And I mean, I burned out for several reasons, but a lot of that was that. For me, like, I found one of the biggest things that helped as well was zooming out and being able to find something that was aligned with my vision. We talked about in the last episode with Colin about zooming out to our 10-year version of you, and like what I'm doing right now, is it aligned towards that, and thinking as the 10-year version of you, and finding things that excite you. And if you're not selling a product that excites you, find something on the side that excites you. Just having that thing that is pulling you out of this hyperachiever mindset of like this thing to that thing, and just being able to look at it instead of being in it so much has been so powerful for me.
Yeah. I have my own coach. I have a lot of people around me, but you need people in your corner to help pull you out of the weeds. The other piece with the hyperachiever is there's like a conditional love or self-love or self-worth. It's like, I can be happy when, or I'll be successful when. So it's conditional on your results or something. And if you think about it, like conditional love, that's not real love. Or it's like, it has to be unconditional. So I think that's the other big trap, is like, I can relax once I've hit X target. I can be successful when I hit whatever sales target or like income in my bank account. I'll be happy when I get X, Y, and Z. But that's the milestones and the finish line moving. But it's conditional. And that's the piece that's like been helpful for me, is to look at, where am I setting conditions for what I see as success, or results in my business and stuff like that. So
it's powerful.
Yeah, it can be eye-opening. And the other part too, sorry, I keep going.
No, it's great. It's great.
Because our identity is so tied to success, it's so stressful to think about not achieving that we tend to actually set the bar a bit lower for ourselves, because we need to hit it. So we're not actually playing to our full potential, because the fear of not hitting that is so like heavy on us.
Wow.
That you're actually playing a little bit below what could be possible if you're able to let go of all that.
That is powerful, I think, in itself, knowing that you can do more by letting go, and being less of a hyperachiever. I think the hyperachiever out there that's listening would probably have an aha moment right there. So that's really powerful. And I guess that kind of leads into another one, the hyper vigilant, side of things. I think this is another one of them that I think resonates for a lot of sales professionals. The spinning of not hitting quota and what could go wrong, and kind of all those elements that I kind of talked about there a little bit. But I think it kind of can lead into that as well.
Totally. Hypervigilant is continuous intense anxiety about all the dangers and what could go wrong. So it's exhausting, because you're constantly like, oh, what about this thing? What about that thing? They're going to say this and I'm going to say that. And like, what if I don't do this? And you're just like constantly spinning. And the image or visual that's been helpful for me is like, picture way back in the day, you're the guy that's got to protect the village from tigers. So you're like standing guard and you're watching like the forest to protect everybody in the village from tigers. But if you're super hyper vigilant and you're like really on edge all the time, like every single thing, every rustle of every leaf, you're just like, oh, like tiger. And you're just like constantly like, what's that? Like, you get so exhausted that you can't actually sift through and see the actual signal that would be a tiger versus a bird or the wind or whatever that is. So because you're so on edge, you actually reduce your performance, which is such a trap, because you're like, I need to be on edge to perform well. And it's counterproductive. And the thing I'll state with all of these, like we talked about the controller, the hyperachiever, all of these things are based on inherent like strengths that people have. So the hypervigilant is somebody like, when they're in sage mode, when they're in Jedi mode with this, there's somebody that's just probably a bit more aware and more attuned to things that could go wrong, and can kind of forecast things and get out in front of things and be more proactive. But what happens is, as you get more and more stressed and more in survival mode, it becomes your biggest weakness. So each of these hinge on things that we're naturally decent at, but we use it and abuse it so much that it actually becomes our biggest Achilles heel, which is the weird, hard thing to like wrap your head around.
Again, that's a very powerful piece to digest, right? Your strength can also be your weakness. And I think tying it back to sales specifically right now, you know, a lot of people would say it's a tough time to be selling. The tech industry as a whole has seen some change, you know, post-COVID. There's been a slowdown, you could say, for a lot of buying organizations in general, and it's tougher to sell right now. And you know, layoffs are taking place, and you know, we talked about this in the last episode too. Like, you know, quotas are increasing, team sizes are reducing, a lot of uncertainty. So it's very easy, like you said, for the individual that usually is pretty aware of all the things, all the rustling in the bushes, to spiral in the sense. And I think about a lot of, you know, VPs and individuals in the startup scene, especially because, you know, like a VP of sales in a startup has to be very aware of all the rustling because things change so quickly, and they have to have that awareness of their environment continually. But when it becomes like it is right now, where constantly on edge, like, oh my God, what's going to happen? There is no real certainty. Not that there ever is, but even less now. I think this is the person probably that feels that a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. Like it's hard to, uncertainty creates a lot of survival and saboteur reactions. And how do you start to reframe uncertainty in a way that's actually more healthy and can serve you a bit better? Because generally it's like uncertainty in the economy, that's bad. Like the judge kicks in. So how do you start to reframe? It's like, okay, what's the opportunity here? What's the gift available to us as a sales team, given the nature of what we're up against? And you start to look for more possibility and potential. It's like putting on a pair of glasses, whereas before it's like, we have to look out for danger. This is bad, that bad, bad, bad. You put on a pair of glasses, it's like, okay, what's the potential here? How do we actually leverage this time to our benefit?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. And like, we could probably spend a whole session talking about how you can like do that. But it's something I would challenge people with, because 90% of my clients will come to me with something and like, oh man, I've got this challenge that's really bad. It's bad. I'm like, is it bad? Like, what's really, like, let's challenge that a little bit. And it's not to take away from the challenge. I'm not saying you're not up against a challenge. It's how do we look at this from a way that actually serves you a bit more and gives you a different energy to attack the problem with. So
yeah, I love that. I think there's, like you said, we could riff on that for so long. I want to, just for time's sake, touch on a couple more that I personally found you know, relevant in sales, and then maybe we can list some of the other ones too that we didn't get a chance to dive into. But the pleaser one, I think, really hit home for me, especially, you know, at a time where like I said, there is so much uncertainty. You feel like you need to overextend and kind of say yes to everything to like prove yourself and prove your worth. So the pleaser really hit home to me as well.
yeah, pleaser is my top saboteur. So I know this one well. And the pleaser, it's indirectly tries to gain acceptance and affection by helping, pleasing, rescuing, or flattering others. Often loses sight of their own needs and becomes resentful as a result. So the way it showed up for me is, as you said, like I'm saying yes to too much. I don't want to let people down. I put others ahead of myself in terms of a priority, which usually results in a lack of boundaries or self-care, and in the past has put me in cycles of burnout because I overextend and I'm saying yes to too much.
Yeah.
And it can also show up because, and like the natural tendency of the pleaser, like the strength there is, it's somebody who likes to give. like somebody who wants to help people, very altruistic, and they connect well with people. They want to be liked, and they usually are likable people, but it does come at a cost, because you either put yourself in burnout and then you can't help people because your glass is empty, or you can become resentful because you're doing all this output and you're not receiving the same way, and the expectation is people will do the same for you, and that's not the case.
Yeah, and I think sorry, I was going to say, I think in sales as well, like a lot of sales leaders might find themselves in this situation trying to be there for the team. There's also some individuals maybe that have to sell as well, as be a leader, and it's very easy to forget about yourself or put yourself second in that sense, where teams are leaner, where expectations are increasing. You feel like you have to be there for everyone, and that pleaser really comes out.
And it comes from a good place of like wanting to help people. And I think what's hard is, it's not like it just happens overnight. It's not like one day it's fine and then the next day you're like, oh, I've overextended. It's just like this incremental thing. So I think it's harder to see those commitments that you're making and how you're overextending. It's just like slowly it adds up over time, and then all of a sudden there's like this boiling point again where you're like, what, something's wrong here, like I'm not feeling like I should be. And it's hard to kind of trace back to what happened because it was so gradual. So the thing, like the image for this one is like, yeah, you got to put the oxygen mask on yourself.
Yeah,
if you want to help others to the best you can, like you need to have a full cup to distribute what you have to other people. But if you have a drained battery, there's nothing else. You can't charge other people's battery with a drained battery.
Yeah. And that's, I think, huge for sales leaders, especially. I think that really, really hits home. I just want to touch on one more. Again, we could talk so much on all these, but restless was another one I think that a lot of people probably can relate to. I know I can, like, just understanding like doing more doesn't necessarily create more. Sometimes I used to think that like, oh, I'm doing all the things, like but I was just doing all the things. You know what I mean? It was very much about do as many things as possible to be productive.
Yeah. And so like I tie some of that with the hyperachiever, like got to do to be a certain way. The restless is a constant search for greater excitement in the next activity or constant busyness, rarely at peace with or content with the current activity. So very much the FOMO, fear of missing out attitude, like constantly moving on to the next thing, can result in a lot of multitasking. Got to do this thing, got to do that thing, got to do this, got to do that thing. And that can be on a more daily, like we could look at your day and be like, you're bouncing around a lot. But it could also be on like a career level where you're bouncing between jobs all the time, or you're bouncing between like career types all the time. And usually there's a like an anxiety around the present moment, and you want to escape from it a bit. So it's in a way it's somewhat similar to the avoider, but instead of just avoiding it, it's like distraction. I'm going to distract and go do something different because it's better over there. And it's like you're digging for water in the desert. You dig 2 feet down, no water. Okay, next hole. Dig 2 feet down, no water, next hole. And you just keep doing that and doing that, and then you just die. Or if you had dug 4 feet, you would have hit water. Right? So it's that ability to stay the course when you need to and stay focused on the things that you need to, instead of just switching around and being in this frenzied state. And it can be tough for people to keep up to.
Oh yeah.
Like if you're in that state and everybody else is like trying to keep up to you, and you're like ripping around going 100 miles an hour, bouncing between things, it can be hard to keep up to you. And that can show up in a sales call. Like just going fast, trying to get to the next thing, making sure you hit every single point when it might not actually be relevant or needed to hit every single point. So actually slowing down to be present with what's actually happening between you and the other person on the call allows you to slow down, check in, get clear, and focus on the 20% that's actually most important versus trying to hit it all.
And I think, like most sales organizations, they would have a bit of a script for discoveries, say, where they're trying to get all this information, and it's a 30-minute call and you're trying to get all this info in, and it can seem a little bit like an interrogation. You're kind of jumping around, you're asking all these questions. You're not present. You're just trying to do all the things, like you said, running around. And I think it can also be visible and be seen by that other individual as well. So such a good reminder, I think, for sales, professionals when they're on that discovery call to really, be there in the, like you said, that 20% as opposed to that 100%. Maybe you get a second call. Maybe you didn't have time to get through everything, but it's better to do that than just like rush through and jump around and be all crazy with it.
Yeah. And sales, I mean, there's so much to sales, and I'm not a pro with sales, but the one thing I do know is we do have influence in how we show up. So we have mirror neurons that I will pick up on the energy that you're bringing, your tone of voice, how fast you're talking, and we can influence people subtly or not so subtly by how we show up. So even if it might not be showing as overtly that I'm stressed out and anxious, people will pick up on that somehow. And maybe it might not be as conscious. And that's a big piece of what's helped me with my coaching is maybe I have a client that I'm like, I don't know if I can help this person. They're like, they seem out of my league, and I get stressed and tight on my coaching. It shows. They pick up on that. So just actually being self-aware enough and self-managing yourself can influence those other people more than you think. And being aware of how that other person, the potential buyer, how they're showing up in the energy that they're bringing can influence you. And being able to like see that happening and have a bit more conscious awareness around how that's happening and how you want to handle it. Which is where I think the stuff where you like can talk a lot to with like awareness and slowing yourself down and nervous system stuff. It's huge.
And I think that's like the perfect place to end this, because it tees it up beautifully for why this podcast exists in the first place, right? It's like building those tools and the foundation to make sure that you can do that, and the things that we're able to take from these episodes to allow that to happen. And I think from this episode, one of the massive takeaways for me already is just knowing these different ways that we self-sabotage and ways that I can relate. And then once I've identified them, being able to then use the toolkit appropriately to have awareness and then address the situation. So, man, amazing conversation, always is. I know a lot of listeners will get a ton of value out of this. So I appreciate you being here. If you're digging what you're hearing, I'll put Fyfe's info in the show notes. You can reach out to him. Also, if you're interested in joining that dadpreneur community, you can hit Fyfe up on LinkedIn. I know there are a lot of dads, new dads, especially in sales, so I'm sure there's a big need for that. So feel free to reach out to Fyfe. Fyfe, thanks so much, man.
Thank you. It's been a blast.
We'll see you soon.